So I think with that, basically going through the agenda. Sorry, I think I dropped off a bit. I was having a bit of a network issue, but I think we're good to go. Just like I was saying before, just before the stream ended, I was basically talking about Bernard. Can you hear me now? I'm seeing your comment in the chat. Are we good? Okay, I think we're good to go now. Yeah, sorry about that. I was basically just talking about the agenda of today, as well as just going through a recap of what we talked about in the previous sessions on Monday and Tuesday specifically. So what we will be able to cover is what is Telos, what makes it stand out, the EVM, governance, and consensus as well. Another thing I would also like to mention is, just as a reminder, I've been seeing a couple of you coming up with groups for the upcoming hackathon next week on Monday and Wednesday, so continue doing that. Looking forward to the projects that you'll be able to build. What the bootcamp is there just to help you guys get started in terms of learning more about Telos and how to write smart contracts within this ecosystem, and also in terms of how to interact with basically other features within the Telos EVM that maybe is not there in other Ethereum L2s or L1 chains as well. So on to the first thing that we'll talk about, which will be in terms of accounts in Telos. So I like using examples because it makes things way easier to understand and grasp specifically. And I'll talk about the Telos EVM kind of like an arcade. I'm a big gamer. I like interacting with different types of games as well as tech and media as well. So if you look at the Telos EVM as an arcade, you'll find that an arcade is filled with different types of tokens or accounts and users as well. And what you'll find is that in this specific arcade, you'll find that the tokens within this space, for example, things you can use will now be gaming tickets, things like digital collectibles, real-world items, or even the passes you would need to play these games and use them. So if you need a pass to enter this arcade, in this sense, it basically acts like an Ethereum account, or in this case, a Telos account. And you'll see that these accounts come in two different varieties in terms of the things that will interact within this specific arcade. The first thing we'll talk about is the player passes. I don't know if you've ever been in an arcade before, but another example I'd also use would be if you've ever played like a PlayStation or an Xbox and you want to play online, you'll find that you have an account that kind of acts like your pass within the internet environment. And this pass basically will let you know that it has a unique address to uniquely identify you within this arcade. And then once you've entered the arcade, you can use this pass to interact with other games as well as the tokens that these games need to run. So for example, the example of using games in this arcade is, for example, how you interact with smart contracts and send transactions within the Telos EVM. Then the second type of account will now be the smart contracts. So in the gaming setup or in the arcade, smart contracts will kind of act like the game booths. For example, here, the example I've given is Wreck-It Ralph, which is actually one of my cousins or younger cousins' favorite movie. They kept watching it all the time. And I was just like, this is a good callback to them as well. Another type of game, maybe you'll see something like Mario Kart or some virtual reality booths or stands as well. And one of the key things that you'll find is, the reason I call these booths relative to smart contracts is when you interact with them is because you've been given a pass to enter the arcade, and also because each of these games have their own rules and possibly tokens that you'll interact with. And that's exactly how smart contracts operate, whereby you find that if I have a game like Wreck-It Ralph and I say that there's a racing part, I can't move past the particular grids or past a particular space, that's kind of like functions within a smart contract. then maybe I need to pay some type of token or amount of money for me to use this booth or this machine. That's when you'll find that, okay, that kind of acts like the tokens in the blockchain space that the smart contracts receive in order to function or to perform certain tasks as well. Then another thing you would find is that when a player wants to play the game and they send the tokens to the game booth, and the booth uses its own set of rules to determine the specific outcome as well. And one thing that I'll maybe add to this is that it needs to be deterministic. It would be weird if your smart contract or your game behaves differently at different times. That's also something that you wouldn't want to do. So having a set method or play or how things are supposed to run is also pretty important. And just going back to that example as well, as I continue expounding on what accounts would be, you'd find that just like in the arcade, the Telos EVM has its own set of passes, or game passes that we call accounts. And in Telos, you'll find that the accounts, they're user accounts, which represent real people who are interacting with the Telos EVM. Then the smart contracts accounts that actually perform specific functions within the Telos EVM. You'll find that the user accounts allow you to interact with the Telos EVM and use its unique tokens and interact with smart contracts. The smart contracts, just like the game booths, have their own rules, like I mentioned before. And for you to use them, you need to have an Telos EVM account and also Telos tokens in this sense. And just like going back to just emphasize and keep mentioning this point, an account will always refer to the user addresses or the smart contract addresses in the EVM. Each account has a unique address, specifically if it's a user account or a smart contract, and you'll find that normally this account can be derived from a public key. So you think about your account being kind of like a key in that sense for most EVM compatible systems. But another thing to note is that in the Telos, you'll find that this account is not necessarily directly related to a public or a private key as it is in other Ethereum networks. You'll find that it's just meant to be something that's unique, which is something that I would say is important for people to also take note of as well. So another thing is these smart contracts are self-executing. As long as they receive tokens from another user, those rules and functions will be performed based on how they've been called. And these smart contracts will maintain their own internal state and basically help you store and manage funds or provide services within the Telos EVM to other users as well. And just in summary, in terms of what I like to mention when talking about that, is this account basically has a human readable name that is stored on the blockchain, firstly. And it can be mapped to a single individual or like a group of people, depending on the configurations that you have. Then they also represent the smart contract actors that push and receive actions from other accounts on the blockchain, or basically transactions in this particular setting. And basically these transactions will also have to be validated within the specific blockchain the way any other normal token transfer may occur. And just as a caveat or something new to note is that they're also a type of account that maybe you do not interact with so much, but it's also there in the Telos EVM and also the Telos Zero, the native chain, is that there's something we call a multi-sig account. It's basically just for security and consensus, whereby different user accounts basically have to sign for a transaction or for something to happen on chain as well, which is something that I think a lot of people need to be aware of, such that there's different ways of using the features and the things available to us within the Telos EVM as well. And since I've briefly talked about accounts being, this is how we basically interact with the EVM. This is the representation of us as users within this ecosystem. You find that this account information needs to be stored somewhere or needs to be kept in a way that we can actually continue to access it as well. And one of the key things that I would mention is that wallets are basically clients that store keys that may or may not be associated with the permissions of one or more account. So just going into that, you'll find that to interact within the Telos ecosystem, you need what we'll call a cryptocurrency wallet, which basically allows you to securely store your assets and interact with other dApps or within the Telos ecosystem, just like I mentioned before. This wallet can either be a device or an application that stores a collection of cryptographic keys and can be used to send and receive and track ownership of cryptocurrencies. So like I mentioned, there's a native token for Telos, which is basically just Telos, the Telos token. But you'll find that you can actually use smart contract tools to mint your own tokens within the ecosystem as well. And these tokens can now be shared, sent amongst different users, and the ownership of those tokens will also be tracked the same way it is for the native token. And ideally, this wallet needs to have two specific states. It can either be locked or unlocked in order to protect the security of your assets. So maybe you set up a wallet like MetaMask, then you've not used it for a couple of weeks or even a couple of days. It will be weird if maybe someone has access to your computer, they just open it up, and once they just tap on the extension, they have full access to your wallet and all of your assets in different networks that it's connected to. And that's why having this password is really important, because it will help protect you from that as well. Another thing to note is that the wallets can take many forms, as I want to just illustrate briefly. I'm sure a number of you who already been in the blockchain space for a while are already aware of how to interact with wallets, but maybe the couple of people here who are new to this and also don't know too much about how wallets work. So you'll find that there are things like paper wallets or hardware wallets, and basically before I even get into that, they'll basically be split into these two levels, whereby there's one thing we refer to as the custodial wallets. So if you've ever heard of something like Binance, for example, you'll realize that they're third-party companies. They're mostly usually decentralized exchanges where people trade cryptocurrencies. But what you'll find is that they'll have a number of cryptocurrency wallets that they have within maybe their servers. That's where they're stored. And basically, you as a user, all you do is access that wallet via their platform. But in terms of the actual control of those wallets, it's going to be these companies that do that. They require less responsibility from your end, but they are more dependent on that specific third party. So, for instance, if maybe that company's servers is hacked, you would actually lose your assets. So it's not the safest and the most advisable way for you to store your tokens. What we'd actually want you to do is have a non-custodial wallet, whereby it's not being managed by a separate entity or company, but what happens is it's basically you who's in charge of the safety of those tokens that you have on there. Alright, then it gives you full control over your assets. But if you ever forget your password, or there's something they give you called a recovery phrase that maybe allows you to recover that wallet whenever you can, maybe in a different device or something like that, if you lose that information, you've lost your tokens for good. Basically, that's the only caveat. So if you're one of those people who keeps forgetting their passwords, maybe after every couple of days, just take extra care when you're handling the information about your wallets. So just like I said, so based on those custodial and non-custodial wallets, you'll find that there's also a breakdown in terms of you can have a wallet that acts like a mobile application, as you can see on screen, and also you would find that you can also have a desktop wallet, one which should be installed within your PC as well. The paper wallets as well. Then there's also the web wallets, which actually act like the wallet extensions that you find on your browser or something like that. Then there's a hardware wallet, We call it a hardware wallet because it's basically like a physical to act like a wallet. So it can be in a USB which you connect to your PC in order for you to connect to the internet, such that you can maybe make transactions or something like that. But ideally, it's separate from any device that is online, just for extra security as well. And based on that description, you'd also find that these wallets can be divided further into hot wallets and cold wallets, which is a term that not many people use quite often, but it's still a good thing to know in terms of a hot wallet basically is a cryptocurrency wallet that has an active connection to the internet basically while it's functioning. So it's pulling data from the different nodes as well. It's more user friendly, specifically since it's so easy to set up and configure. Then it's used very often, mostly like for day-to-day transactions per se. Maybe if you're a crypto trader, your wallet maybe on Binance will be a hot wallet because you're using it to make a lot of trades on a daily basis. But for the cold wallet, which is now the paper wallets and the hard wallets, they're a bit harder to use because you have to be more tech savvy in order to implement them, especially the hardware wallet. Then the other thing is they are not connected to the internet as well, hence they are more secure. And you'll find that commonly they're used to store tokens long term or over time. Maybe you don't want to access them every day, but you just need to keep them somewhere safe. The only thing maybe you'll consider this is maybe if you're a whale in the crypto space, whale meaning that you have a lot of tokens, or the tokens you have a really high value, you'd find that those are the people who mostly interact with cold wallets because you have more assets, so you have to take better or extra care in order to safeguard them as well, which is what I would consider. Then the other thing I would probably mention would be in terms of the specific wallets, the different softwares that you can use. But before I get into that, I'll just go back and talk about Telos as well. I mentioned about how the Telos ecosystem basically has two layers. There's the layer one, which is now the native network for Telos, which we refer to as Telos 0. Then there's the Telos EVM, which is implemented as a smart contract on Telos 0. What you would find is the accounts that you have on Telos 0 are actually different from the accounts that you'll have on the Telos EVM. What that means is that you would have to map your Telos account on Telos 0 to the one on Telos EVM. I'm not going to get too much into that because our focus is on the EVM, because that's where, as a builder, you'll focus a lot more of your attention on. But it's just something that I thought that is important to note. So what you'll find is in the labs that we'll be doing tomorrow specifically, prior to the ones we'll do on Friday, because this will be the last theoretical session that we'll have together. After this, we're going purely into the coding and the technical stuff. I know a number of you have been waiting for that. But one thing to note at this point is that you'll have to fetch tokens from the Telos network and bridge them to the Telos EVM, since the EVM also uses the native Telos token for you to maybe pay for the gas fees on the EVM when you're sending transactions, when you're using smart contracts. So that's the reason I added this note here. Just something that I felt that it's important for all of us to note, even as we continue with the sessions as well. Then for the wallet options, I'm going to purely focus only on the Telos Cloud Wallet and the MetaMask. Cloud Wallet, the reasons for this is because it supports both the Telos EVM and Telos 0 network. However, another thing to note is that you can basically set up a wallet using your Google account, which is actually pretty important. I'm just going to show the interface in terms of how it looks. I may not go through the whole process because I don't want to maybe share some of my personal details for my Google account as well. But another thing is you can also set this up using MetaMask as well. So we'll do the whole process tomorrow as well. But right now what I want to do is, let me just exit this particular screen just so I can basically give you a walkthrough of how it might look in terms of setting up this wallet. So maybe the first thing that you need to do is, maybe if you're using the Telos Cloud Wallet, sorry about that, you'll basically be coming and selecting based on these options here. So the first option is now the Telos Cloud Wallet, which it now gives you the pop-up for signing in with Google, whereby now you can maybe select a specific account. We may have a number of accounts that are logged in here, but I'm not going to share them at the moment. But once you select it, it'll basically give you a step-by-step guide in terms of now how you receive your wallet addresses and maybe your recovery phrase as well. For the other option, which was now MetaMask in terms of what we are looking at. So for me, I'm already installed my MetaMask wallet here as a wallet extension. If you don't have this, don't worry too much about it. We'll go about how to set this up during tomorrow's session as well before we get into the labs. But basically it's just a list of the tokens that you have. Currently, I think I'm connected to the Polygon ZK EVM testnet, but I'll show you how we connect with the Telos testnet or the mainnet. So one of the ways that we can do that is once you've created your MetaMask wallet and you've received your token, not your token, but you received your passphrase as well as now the recovery phrase, you'll now go to Telos Scan, which is basically a website that gives you insights into the transactions happening in the Telos network. But you'll find that there's one for the testnet, then there's also one for the mainnet as well. So I'm just opening up the one for the mainnet so we can just take a look at it as well. And you'll see it's already automatically asking me if I can connect my MetaMask wallet to this particular testnet. So you'll see it'll give you this pop-up in terms of these being the details for the Telos mainnet. Then you can find that if you want to navigate and connect to the testnet, you'd find that, let me just open that up. Sorry, not that. Actually, I'll click here this drop down specifically. Then it's gonna give you sign in, liquid, staking. Then there's also the advanced options. So for the advanced options, I can actually now switch to the Telos Scan testnet instead of the mainnet, which will now also prompt me to, do I want to connect to the testnet as well, which is just something key that you may need to take note of as we continue as well. Then another thing is, in case you don't get that pop-up in terms of the MetaMask one, you can actually go ahead and connect to it directly. And how that will look would be, for example, if I click on the sign in button or the sign in option, I'll have the same options I had. So for example, the advanced ones will mostly be just for if you want to use Anchor, but since we're focusing on MetaMask specifically, if I come here and I click there, it will just give me the same pop-up in case you missed it while you open this website the first time. So that's just a walkthrough of how you can basically get started with the Telos testnet and how to connect it to now your MetaMask wallet as well. So just as I continue the slide, I was just going to go through the different wallet options that you would have in terms of using this setup. Then another thing would be, for example, now if you want to move to talking about the actual Telos native currency, you'll find that one big thing about the Telos currency is that it also has a lot of utility in the network, which is not the same for a lot of other blockchains with reference to their native token. So so this really gives it some inherent value, even in terms of maybe you're looking to trade. It seems like a small thing, but it actually has a huge impact in terms of user perception. And we're going to talk about some of those utilities that this Telos token has. But basically, like it says here, it's a native currency of the Telos network, and it plays a pivotal role in various aspects of the ecosystem, all the way from governance to gas fees, resource allocation, staking as well as some on-chain decision making, which is actually pretty important to mention as well. And in terms of governance, just like I said, it being the primary token, you find that it empowers token holders to influence decisions and vote on critical network upgrades. And this is actually key because as long as you hold this token within the Telos network, you'd find that you're able to basically have some stake, some equity in terms of the choices that can be made on the network. Then in terms of gas fees, specifically for the EVM, as much as Telos is a native token for now the layer 1 network, you find that you still need to use it to pay for transactions on the EVM as well. And in that sense, that also adds some level of importance to it as well. Then it basically allows you to interact with smart contracts, send tokens, and execute transactions. And for you to have an active wallet, you'll find that you need to have some Telos tokens within your wallet as well. And this whole concept of how the gas fees are set to operate using this token also adds to some level of security within the Telos network, as well as within its own staking operations as well. I find the other thing now in terms of just tracking back slightly to the Telos 0 or the layer 1 network, you find that it can be used to buy network resources that users may transact, compute and store data on the specific Telos chain as well. There are links that are added that hopefully you can also share in this chat in terms of just learning more about how this works. Then finally, I think, last but not least, in terms of the functions and utilities you can have with the Telos token, is staking, whereby you can earn returns that are compounded now every minute in terms of people who are staking and basically producing new blocks within the ecosystem. So the rewards come from a community reserve and are distributed to those who stake their Telos tokens. And more on staking, because it's actually an important function within the Telos ecosystem, is basically the two smart contracts that help us to achieve this. There's a staked Telos contract, which is an ERC20 token implementing ERC4626, that basically represents the share of deposited Telos. So once you deposit your Telos and get the equivalent S Telos tokens in return, such that you can still continue making transactions within the network now using the S Telos token, you find that this Telos token that you submitted to the smart contract basically acts as your share that you've staked within the Telos ecosystem. Then you can always use the S Telos tokens like any other ERC20 token within the Telos ecosystem. Then the second contract is now the escrow contract, which will now actually lock all of the Telos contracts that have been submitted or deposited for a specific amount of time. So just to ensure that, okay, this is your stake within this ecosystem. The good thing is at any point you can always remove the tokens that you've staked. So basically what will happen is that the S Telos that you received will now be converted back to the Telos token in that whole particular process as well. Then I think the final thing that I'll just highlight briefly as well is now on transactions on the Telos EVM and how they work. So we talked about accounts and wallets when we started, and basically transactions are another reason for accounts to exist, because transactions can only exist between two or more accounts within the Telos ecosystem. So without an account, who do you know or we should be receiving your tokens, and how exactly are they going to go about receiving them? So you'll find that the Telos EVM uses Telos 0 to pay for gas, just like I mentioned before. And just based on that thought, like I've already alluded to, you find that you have to have the native Telos token on your EVM account to do transactions. And in order for you to deposit these tokens, Firstly, you can either transfer it from an existing Telos Zero account, and basically you can purchase these tokens on the web wallet or through one of the official portals listed on the Telos website. And another way of doing this is specifically for the testnet. You'll find that there are different faucets that basically give testnet tokens to people who are maybe developing or testing out their dApps within the Telos testnet, and you need these tokens in order to see how well your dApps or maybe your smart contracts are operating, specifically how your dApps are interacting with the smart contracts you've deployed. So that's also another way of receiving these specific tokens. And how these tokens are used specifically in terms of transactions is that the key aspect right now we'll be looking at the gas fees related, and you'll find that there are two values within this gas fees. Number one would be the gas price, which is now what the signer has to pay. Then there's also now the gas limit, which is the most amount of gas that will be approved by use for the transaction. I'll just mention how differently from how the original Ethereum network worked, where anyone can basically just say, I'm willing to pay this amount for transactions and basically outbid everyone else. That's not possible in Telos, because you'll find that the fees are kept fairly standard, and that actually helps in terms of preventing there being what we're now referring to as front running, as we discussed yesterday. Then another thing to note will now be these fees that are collected as part of this gas price billing are sent to a fee account as part of every transaction, and these fees will be added back to the network reserves, which will now be used to pay validators or basically share rewards and other funding sources within the EVM, just making sure that now this is purely sustainable from a tokenomics point of view as well. Then I think the last thing I'll just briefly talk about would now be the smart contracts, as I allude to the session that we will be having tomorrow, where we're actually writing our first smart contract and deploying it onto the Telos testnet. You'll find that a smart contract is basically just that, a piece of code that can execute on a blockchain and keep the state of contract execution as part of its history, part of the data that is associated with it as well. So we'll be writing the smart contracts in Solidity, since this is an EVM compatible chain, and we'll see how the different components and the different, syntax come together within this specific smart contract. Just in case you've never written one before, it's going to be such a fun experience, and we're looking forward to how we can actually go about implementing this as well. So since today was just basically me introducing you to wallets and accounts and seeing how they actually look and operate, for tomorrow's session, we'll just do a brief recap of how we go about setting up wallets and accounts. Then finally, we'll also be looking at how do we actually fund these accounts using the faucets, and finally, how will we actually write and deploy our very first smart contract on the Telos testnet. That's going to be the whole agenda for tomorrow's session. It's going to be slightly longer than the ones we've been having on Monday, yesterday, as well as today. Then finally on Friday, we'll be looking at how do we actually write a dApp or a front-end application that communicates with the smart contracts that we've deployed. And basically, once we're done with that, should be like you would have successfully created your first dApp on the Telos ecosystem, just in preparation for next week's hackathon, just to give you some insight and basically help you get started out with what you'll be building next week as well. So thank you for your time. As always, for those of you who always want to look back at the recordings, they'll be available in our playlist for the Telos Bootcamp. Just another reminder as well would be that we have the hackathon teams being formed right now as we speak across our different communities. So make sure you reach out to the people there in case you don't have a team yet, get to know them, see if you have similar ideas and how you can actually interact with one another, such that come next week, you're ready to go hit the ground running. Still have a couple of sessions left this week, and also we'll have some live sessions for the hackathon just to touch base with you guys and maybe give you some guidance. I'll also be sharing more information on the mentors and how we'll be interacting with them from the Telos team as well, together with Nathan and the rest of the team, just to see how we can actually help you guys get started out in terms of building your dApps as well. So I think with that, unless there are any other questions within the chat or any other comments, I've been seeing the feedback I'm getting from you guys as well. Thank you for interacting with me as well. So if you have any questions, feel free to shoot, just as a wind up on today's session specifically. Okay, I'm guessing you guys are good to go and ready for tomorrow's session as well. Thank you for your time. As always, it's been a pleasure, and can't wait to interact with you more as the week continues. So cheers, guys. I'm seeing Crypto King M3 saying thank you. Also, thank you for joining me as always. I'll see you guys tomorrow.